Hi and welcome back to a new video. Today Intel is launching the Arrow Lake Refresh CPUs and honestly I'm quite excited. It's not the fastest CPU you can buy, but it's one of the best price performance CPUs I've seen in a long time and also one of the best Intel launches I've seen in a long time. There is the Intel 250K Plus, that is a CPU with 6 P-cores and 12 E-cores for about €200, and the 270K Plus with 8 P-cores and 16 E-cores for about €300. This essentially means that a 270K Plus is a 285K for €200 less. There are only small differences, but surprisingly in my test the 270K Plus was 4% faster than a 285K, and all this together makes the CPU pretty interesting, and that's also why I focused mainly on the 270K Plus. The Seasonic PX 2200 is currently one of the strongest PSUs available, and it comes with two native PCIe 5.1 connectors, which allows to even hook up natively to RTX 5090. That is perfect for any overclocking system or high-end workstations. I'm also currently running this PSU and so far I'm really satisfied with its quality and performance. The cables are very flexible, there are also cable comms included, and in addition also a 90-degree ATX 24-pin adapter, which also functions as a PSU tester at the same time. The fan is semi-passive and even at a high load it is still very quiet. Find all information about this PSU in the link in the description. Already about 2 weeks ago Intel announced the specs of the 200S Plus CPUs, and there was a YouTube video on the Intel channel by Robert Hellock. And I have to point this out because this was honestly one of the best product launch videos I have seen in our industry for a long time. We're so used to all this bullshit marketing, AI, blah blah, and there was none of this inside. This was so nice to listen to and watch, you just got the technical specs, all the details, what the CPU is about, the naming scheme explained and all that, and this was executed very well. Thanks Intel, please keep going in that direction. So these new CPUs have a plus suffix in their name, and with this Intel wants to communicate that those are refresh CPUs. They decided against, for example, Intel 300, which is something I personally absolutely appreciate. So again, we have the 250K Plus and the 270K Plus. 250K Plus comes with 18 cores total and 270K Plus with 24 cores total. As you know, those consist of P and E cores. Intel is talking about that the new CPUs are significantly faster than the previous ones. For example, if you compare 265K with 270K Plus. But it's not that easy to compare because the core configuration is also fully different. What I personally find easier to digest is the comparison versus AMD CPUs in the same price region. For example, this slide where they compare a 270K Plus with a 9700X, and here we can see mainly a big difference in the core count. And I have to admit that Intel pulled a very interesting move here, because they were advertising slides like plus 100% multi-threading performance versus competition, and this is true. And it's not like it's suddenly a miracle CPU, it's because they made a CPU, the 270K Plus, which is essentially a 285K, but they brought the price down so hard that you can now essentially compare a 285K with a 9700X. That's what's happening in reality, because the difference between the 270K Plus and the 285K is almost not existing. The two CPUs are mainly different in a few clocks, and here is the slide of frequency enhancements, but I have to say it's not that easy to understand or to compare because we're comparing different CPUs. So yeah, that's a bit weird. What's important though is that we see 900 MHz die-to-die clock increase and 100 MHz E-core clock increase, and also 400 MHz memory clock increase that is officially supported. That's why I made this small chart to compare the CPUs. And for the P-core clock, I have to say I used the max supported turbo clock, so that's a little bit easier to compare. The 285K without the 200S boost feature is max supporting a memory speed of 6400 megatransfers, while the 270K Plus officially supports now 7200 megatransfers. And then you can see the difference. 270K Plus is P-cores 100 MHz slower and E-cores 100 MHz faster. One side note though is that the 285K has additional features that I neglected in this chart, such as a thermal velocity boost, but I also have to say in my test it didn't really help the 285K. I want to take the chance to test this rather obscure motherboard, at least in the gaming section. It's a Asus ProWS Z890 Ace SE, and you will surely directly notice that the socket is rotated by 90 degrees this way, so you can see that the memory is located on the top, and also the VRM is slightly rotated. That is also typically a challenge for PCIe routing, because the PCIe lanes have to go through here and then to the PCIe slot. Another thing you might notice is that the EPS connectors for CPU power supply is also rotated and is in a not so nice location, at least for a normal gaming setup. But it's not a gaming motherboard, it's a workstation motherboard, which you can also see by this BMC. It's an AST 2600, and that's also why you have 3 Ethernet ports. So one of them to access the BMC directly, and the other ones are 10G and 2.5G Ethernet connectors. But I think overall it's a pretty interesting motherboard, and I just wanted to try it. And with this, we want to insert our 270K Plus CPU. But for best thermals, we will first remove the stock Intel ILM and replace it with an 1851 contact frame. We will custom water cool it this time. I showed you our Mycro Pro AMD in the past. Now the first time that I'm actually using the 1851 myself. It's a rare event because honestly, I haven't been using 1851 much in the past, and I guess kind of reflects also the previous market reception. That's how the Intel block looks like, quite unique cooling structure. You can also see a filter on the inlet port, and that is to protect the cooling structure, because let's imagine you have some small particles inside your radiator and some of them become loose, like initial you didn't flush or whatever, then they would get stuck in the filter instead of the fins, because the fins are usually the smallest structure in your loop and thus get stuck in there, and this will have an impact on the cooling performance. But if it gets stuck in the filter, at least to a certain degree, you will not have a negative impact on your cooling, because just the cross section, the area of the filter is bigger than what you have on the inlet side. So yeah, if there is even a small amount of particles getting stuck in here, you will not be able to tell this on your cooling performance, and this just prolongs the time you can use it without having to clean it. And as known with Intel, there is no backplate that is included and mounted on the motherboards. That's why you always have to use a backplate on Intel systems, and that's also what we include in the delivery of the Intel block. This one nicely CNC milled aluminium. The design just matches perfectly. Absolutely love how this turned out. I'm not sure what it is, but this type of workstation BIOS always gives me just nice feelings. Flashbacks, yeah, updating BIOS first. And that's, by the way, how the cooler looks like with RGB attached, or in this case, I just set it to blue, just to match Intel. And now we want to see how the CPU behaves under load. We have the 270K Plus with the latest BIOS, as you can see on our Pro WS motherboard. The memory is running at 7200 megatransfers C34, so that's the kit that Intel provided, and also the max supported speed without running the 200S boost. When running R23, we can see a power consumption of about 220 watts. That results with custom water cooling in about 70 degrees Celsius, so pleasant CPU temperature similar to a 285K. P-cores as expected 5.4, E-cores as expected on 4.7 GHz, and this results in 43,000 points almost, but we're losing a bit of performance because we have hardware info open at the same time. And with this, we're jumping into the multi-threading benchmarks with R23 that we just looked at. The 270K Plus definitely benefits by its increased D2D clock and also the increased E-core clock by 100 MHz. At a clean run, I could see about 44,000 points with a power consumption of about 223 watts. With this, the 270K Plus is 4% faster than a 285K, and it also beats the AMD CPUs by far at just a fraction of the price. I could observe the same behavior in a 3D Mark CPU Profile Max. The 270K Plus beats the 285K by 5%, but it's also consuming 10% more power with 163 watts under load. And again, it's beating all the AMD CPUs in multi-threading. With Adobe 4K video rendering, I'm looking at an application that I'm using personally daily, and here I'm rendering one of my YouTube videos. And again, the 270K Plus performs pretty well. I would say almost identical to an 285K, and again, if you take the pricing into account, this is quite impressive. If you just look at multi-threading performance, the 270K Plus is super strong. But I have to say that already the 285K was quite strong in multi-threading performance. That was never the problem. The problem was mostly that gaming performance was often disappointing. We're taking a quick look into Star Wars Outlaws to see how the CPU behaves here. And you can see typically a CPU temperature of about 40 to max 50 degrees Celsius, so it's staying really cold. Very similar to a 285K as expected, and also the clocks are similar. We can see 100 MHz higher on the E-cores with 4.7 GHz, and the P-cores are mostly staying at 5.4, which is also only 100 to max 200 MHz difference to what I saw with the 285K. And with this, we're jumping into gaming benchmarks with Counter-Strike 2. And at least for me, this was one of the games where I saw the biggest issues with error lake and performance. And while I can see an improvement with the 270K Plus, it still can't match AMD's CPUs, all of which are using the 3D V-Cache. But there are also other cases, as Star Wars Outlaws that we just looked at. The 285K was already strong in this game before, and now I can't really tell a difference between the 285K and the 270K Plus. One could think that this is disappointing, that there is no difference, but I think this is actually impressive if you think back that the price point of this CPU is 300 euros. But as expected, the 270K Plus will not be the fastest gaming CPU you can buy. And that's what we can again see, for example, in Cyberpunk 2077 in 1080p resolution. Here you can see a 9950X 3D with 3D V-Cache will still be the faster CPU. Across all my benchmarks that I performed, I could see that the 270K Plus beat the 285K by about 4%. But that is also because I was not using 200S boost features for the 285K. That is something you can enable in BIOS and get a bit of extra performance for the 285K. I think if you would do that, they would perform probably similar. Effectively, we're getting a 270K Plus with 285K performance for 200 euros less, and especially if we switch in a 4K benchmark like this one with a Cyberpunk, 4K means that you're running in the GPU limit and you can hardly see a difference between all those CPUs. In a price region of 300 euros, you could get AMD's 9700X, but I have to say that a 270K Plus at this price point is the much better option. The biggest problem though is the platform, 1851, because we know you won't be able to upgrade. This is the last CPU you will be able to get for this socket, because the following socket for Nova Lake gonna be 1954. This means that you will have to just accept that you go with this platform, you go with this CPU, and you won't be able to upgrade this, for example, in 2 years. And if this is important for you, AM5 might just be the better option. This means if you don't care about upgradability, the 270K Plus is an absolutely great option for the price. And I'm also happy to see in which direction Intel is currently going, and I hope they will keep the same strategy for Nova Lake. That should keep things interesting. Glad that we can finally see a little bit of competition. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye bye.